The girl couldn't have been older than 9. She was standing at the edge of the parking garage on the 3rd level, just past the stairwell door, holding a folded piece of paper against her chest like it was something she'd been told never to let go of. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing Gerald Whitmore noticed. She wasn't crying, and she wasn't looking for help the way lost children usually do, scanning the crowd, mouth trembling. She was looking directly at him. "Sir," she said, "don't get in that car." Gerald had just clicked the unlock button on his key fob. The black sedan 30 feet away blinked twice in response. He looked at the girl, then at the car, then back at the girl. "Excuse me, please." She took one step toward him, and her voice dropped even though there was no one else nearby. "I heard them talking. In the stairwell. About your car. About you." Gerald Whitmore was 61 years old. He had spent 34 of those years practicing corporate law in Charlotte, North Carolina, the last 18 as senior partner at Whitmore and Crane. He had negotiated 9-figure mergers. He had sat across tables from men who lied with the ease of breathing. He knew how to read a room, read a face, read the space between what someone said and what they meant, and something about this child made his hands stop moving toward the door handle. "What did you hear?" he said. She held out the folded paper. He took it, opened it slowly. It was a receipt from the parking garage, the kind the machine prints when you pay. But on the back, in pencil, someone had written a partial license plate number in a single sentence. "Cut the brake line on the left rear. Make sure he doesn't make it to the highway." Gerald read it twice. He felt his chest tighten in a way it hadn't since the night his father had a heart attack, and Gerald had sat in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning not knowing what to do with his hands. "Where did you get this?" he said. "It fell out of his pocket," the girl said. "In the stairwell. He didn't see me. I was sitting on the steps eating my lunch because my mom works in the office building next door, and she lets me wait there when school gets out early." She paused. There were 2 of them, one tall one and one with a gray jacket. The tall one said the car was already done. The other one said to wait until you were on I-85. Gerald looked at the license plate of his own car. The partial number on the receipt matched the last 4 digits. He did not move. His first instinct, the instinct that 34 years of law had built into his spine, was to be skeptical. Children misheard things. Children dramatized things. The mind of a 9-year-old filling in a story from fragments of overheard conversation. It was possible, it was even likely. But he had learned in 34 years that the most dangerous thing a man could do was let his preference for a comfortable explanation override the evidence in his hand. He looked at the receipt again. The handwriting was an adult's. The language was specific. Left rear, I-85. Those were not the details a child invented. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said. "Lily, I need you to stay right here with me. Don't go anywhere." He took out his phone and called the one number he had memorized 20 years ago and never deleted. His old college roommate, now a detective with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. "Pete," he said when the line picked up, "I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to not ask me if I'm sure." Pete Callahan arrived in 11 minutes with 2 officers in a second car. Gerald and Lily waited near the elevator bank, away from the black sedan. Gerald had bought Lily a bottle of water from a vending machine on level 2. She held it with both hands and sat on a concrete barrier and watched the cars below with the calm attentiveness of someone who had already done the hardest part of what she'd been asked to do. Pete examined the undercarriage of Gerald's car without touching it. He stood up, walked back, and the expression on his face was the same expression Gerald had seen on him 39 years ago in a dorm room when they'd both looked at an exam question and realized neither of them had studied the right chapter. "Gerald," Pete said quietly, "left rear brake line. Partially severed. It would have held through city streets, maybe. But highway speeds, hard braking." He stopped. He didn't need to finish. Gerald sat down on the concrete barrier next to Lily. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The garage smelled like exhaust and old concrete. 3 levels down, a car alarm went off for 4 seconds and then stopped. Somewhere a door slammed. "The 2 men," Pete said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "Can you tell me anything else about them? What they looked like? What they were wearing?" Lily thought for a moment with the seriousness of a child who understood that this was not a game. The tall one had a tattoo on his neck. "I don't know what it was exactly. A bird, maybe. And he had on boots that were muddy even though it hasn't rained." She frowned slightly. "The other one called him Dex." Pete looked at Gerald. Gerald said nothing. They both knew what it meant to have a name. There was a question Gerald hadn't asked yet. He hadn't asked it because he was afraid that the answer would be the answer he already suspected, the one that had been forming in the back of his mind since the moment he read the note. Not fully. Not in words. But in the particular coldness that settles in when something you've been refusing to see becomes impossible to ignore. Who knew he would be? In that garage today. He had told his assistant, Claire. He had told his wife. He had not told anyone else. Gerald and Sandra Whitmore had been married for 26 years. They had met at a bar association dinner in 1999, which Sandra always described as the least romantic origin story she'd ever heard. And Gerald always countered that it was the most honest, because at a bar association dinner you already knew what you were getting. They had built a life together. A house in Myers Park, 2 sons in college, a membership at a golf club Gerald never used, and Sandra used every Thursday morning. On paper it looked like the kind of marriage people described as solid. Gerald had known for 8 months that something had shifted. He couldn't have put it into specific words at first. It was in the way a room felt when he walked into it. It was in the way Sandra answered questions half a second too late, as if she had been somewhere else and needed a moment to return. It was in the way she had started keeping her phone face down on every surface. He had told himself it was stress. She was managing her mother's estate. She was dealing with a difficult situation at the foundation she ran. There were explanations. There were always explanations, if a man was willing to work hard enough to find them. 3 months ago, he had stopped working that hard. He hadn't said anything. He was a lawyer. He gathered evidence before he made arguments. That was not coldness. Or maybe it was, a little, but it was also the only way he knew how to move through the world without making mistakes he couldn't take back. He had found things, small things. A dinner reservation for 2 at a restaurant she'd never mentioned. A text thread that had been deleted but not from the cloud backup his son had set up on her phone last Christmas. Messages to a man named Brian Forsyth, who turned out to be a financial consultant Gerald had met exactly once, at a charity event, a man with a particular kind of ease that comes from never having had to work very hard for anything. The messages were not ambiguous, but Gerald had not yet decided what to do about them. He had been deciding for 3 months, which he recognized was its own kind of answer. He sat in the parking garage with a little girl named Lily and a detective who was already making phone calls, and he thought about the fact that the only 2 people who knew he would be in this garage today were his assistant of 12 years and his wife of 26. He thought about Brian Forsyth. He thought about a life insurance policy that Sandra had suggested they increase 18 months ago. They had increased it. Gerald had not thought about it again until this moment. He closed his eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then he opened them and called Claire. "Claire," he said, "did you tell anyone I was coming to the Meridian building today?" A pause. "No, Mr. Whitmore. You asked me not to schedule it in the system. I didn't tell anyone. Did Sandra call the office today?" A longer pause. "Yes, sir, around 10. She asked where you'd be this afternoon. I told her." Claire's voice changed slightly. "I told her Meridian. I didn't think." "It's all right," Gerald said. "You didn't do anything wrong. I need you to do something for me. I need you to call building security and have them pull the sign-in logs for the garage for today. And Claire, don't mention this to anyone until I call you back." He hung up. Pete was watching him. "How long have you known?" Pete said. "Known what?" "Gerald." Gerald looked at the black sedan sitting 30 feet away. A car he had bought 2 years ago, because Sandra had said the old one made the driveway look like they didn't care about the neighborhood. He had laughed at that. He had bought the car. 8 months, he said. Maybe longer. Pete sat down on the concrete barrier on Gerald's other side. For a moment, the 3 of them, a 61-year-old lawyer, a 58-year-old detective, and a 9-year-old girl, eating the last of a granola bar she'd produced from her jacket pocket, sat together in a parking garage in Charlotte, watching officers in latex gloves document a severed brake line. She didn't think anyone would look for her, Pete said finally. Not a question, not an accusation. Just the way he had always said hard things, plain, without ceremony. "No," Gerald said. "I don't think she did." What happened next unfolded over 72 hours in the way that these things always unfolded. Not like a dramatic scene, but like a flood after a levee breaks, slow at first and then everywhere at once, water finding every crack. The man named Dex was Dexter Pruitt, a former military contractor with 2 prior arrests in Georgia, neither of which had resulted in conviction. He was found the next morning at a motel 12 miles outside the city. The second man, the one in the gray jacket, was Kenneth Marsh, who turned out to have done work for Brian Forsyth's firm on 2 previous occasions. What kind of work occupying a paragraph in the arrest report that Gerald read once and did not read again? The phone records took 48 hours. Gerald already knew what they would show before Pete called to tell him. Sandra had called Kenneth Marsh's number 4 times in the previous 3 weeks. The last call was the morning Gerald went to Meridian. Gerald did not go home during those 72 hours. He stayed in a hotel downtown, a place he had taken depositions in many times, a place that smelled like recycled air and industrial carpet cleaner, and was, in its complete neutrality, exactly what he needed. He ordered room service and ate it at the desk and worked through his files and did not sleep much and did not call Sandra. Sandra called him. Twice on the first day, once on the second. Her voicemails were the voicemails of a woman who did not yet know what had been found, and Gerald listened to them with the detachment of someone reviewing evidence, because that was what they were now. On the third morning, Pete came to the hotel. He sat down in the chair by the window and Gerald sat on the edge of the bed and Pete said, "She's been arrested. Brian Forsyth is cooperating. Charges are conspiracy to commit murder. DA is talking about attempted murder with premeditation." Gerald nodded. "You okay?" Pete said. "I'm working on it," Gerald said. Pete nodded. He had known Gerald since they were 19 years old. He understood that working on it was not a deflection. It was an honor. Gerald had 2 sons. The elder Thomas was 24, finishing a graduate program in urban planning in Boston. The younger Andrew was 21, a junior at UNC Chapel Hill. Gerald called them both on the third day, from the hotel room, sitting at the desk where he had been eating room service meals and staring at legal pads on which he had written nothing. Those were the 2 hardest phone calls he had ever made. Not because he didn't know what to say. He knew exactly what to say. He had been a lawyer for 34 years. He knew how to convey facts clearly and without unnecessary embellishment. The facts were hard enough without embellishment. The hard part was hearing his sons' voices go quiet in that particular way that adult children go quiet when the structure they built their lives on top of turns out to have been built on something other than solid ground. Thomas said very little for a long time and then said, "Are you safe?" Andrew said, "Dad, I'm getting in the car right now." Gerald told Andrew not to get in the car. Andrew got in the car anyway. He arrived at the hotel at 11:30 at night and sat with Gerald for 2 hours, and they ordered terrible hotel coffee and didn't talk about Sandra very much, and mostly talked about other things. And Gerald was more grateful for this than he knew how to say out loud. 2 weeks later, Gerald went back to the Meridian parking garage. He wasn't sure why, exactly. A lawyer's habit, maybe, returning to the scene to make sure he understood it. Or something less professional than that. He took the elevator to level 3 and stood near the stairwell door and looked at the space where he had been standing when Lily had said, "Sir, don't get in that car." He had asked Pete to find out more about her. Lily Anderson, age 9, who waited in parking garage stairwells and ate granola bars and watched the world with eyes that didn't flinch. Her mother was a paralegal named Catherine Anderson who worked in the office tower connected to the garage. She had been a single mother since Lily was 4. She had, according to Pete, described her daughter as the kind of kid who notices everything and isn't scared of anything, which is terrifying as a parent, but also the best thing I ever did. Gerald had sent a letter. Not to be formal, though it came out formal, because he was a formal man. And this was the only instrument he had for the deepest things. But because he needed Lily and her mother to understand something that he wasn't sure he could say out loud without his voice. Doing something he didn't want it to do. He had written, "I have been in courtrooms for 34 years. I have watched witnesses give testimony that changed lives. In all that time, I cannot tell you that I have ever seen more genuine courage than I saw from your daughter on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a parking garage." She had no reason to intervene. No one told her to. No one would have faulted her for walking away. She chose not to, and because she chose not to, I am here to write this letter. He had also enclosed something for Lily's college fund. He had not included a card explaining what amount. He was a lawyer. He understood that some communications were more dignified without itemization. The morning Gerald returned to the office, a Monday, 3 weeks after the parking garage, he took the stairs instead of the elevator, all 9 floors, because Pete had told him once that Pete's doctor had said stairs were the single best thing a man over 50 could do for his heart, and Gerald had always meant to start taking the stairs, and never had. He pushed through the door into the 9th floor hallway slightly out of breath. Claire was at her desk and looked up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," in exactly the tone of voice she used every morning, as if nothing had changed, which was one of the most decent things anyone had done for him in 3 weeks. "Good morning, Claire," he said. He walked to his office. He hung his coat on the hook behind the door. He sat down at his desk and looked out the window at Charlotte. Spread out below him, a city he had lived in for 34 years, full of people going about their ordinary lives in which ordinary things happened and extraordinary things almost never did. He thought about a 9-year-old girl sitting on a stairwell step, eating a granola bar. He thought about the fact that courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't dress up or arrive with context. It shows up as a child in a parking garage holding a piece of paper and saying, "Sir," to a man who has every social reason not to listen. He opened the first file on his desk. He started work. Outside the window, Charlotte was bright and ordinary, and entirely itself, and Gerald Whitmore was, improbably, and with considerable effort, still in it.